Welcome back. As you know, blended families becoming more and more common with every passing decade. Do you have the right will and estate in place if you are in that situation? We have Leah Carr joining us today from Fulton and Company to talk to us a little bit about this. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, the days of the traditional nuclear family, they're still there, certainly. But there's certainly less of them out there than there used to be. But have people caught up with the idea of making sure that their plans are in place for the future when it comes to, passing the torch to the next generation?
Yes, I think people have caught up to the point where they're a little bit terrified because suddenly the significance of it is hitting home, and we talk about the wealth transfer that's going to be happening over the next 20, 30 years. So it's bigger deal now, and it's becoming something that's more and more important for people to take care of sooner than later.
So tell me a little bit about some of the tips that spouses should be thinking about, the things that you should know.
Yeah, when we're doing estate planning, as a lawyer doing estate planning, we're trying to balance those very delicate balance between new spouse, second spouse, and also the children from your prior relationship. Maybe your new spouse also has children, so then it's truly blending two sets of children together. And we often see a scenario where there's a bit of a disparity in terms of what the assets that the spouse has brought into the relationship. So one spouse may have amassed a greater amount of wealth before they merge their marriage, and there's already at the get-go some disparity between them. One spouse has more, they brought in more than the other one. So it becomes not an even playing field. And because of that, we recognize that trying to keep all parties happy, the balance between the spouses and the children, isn't easy. This means putting off decisions. It becomes backburnered. It becomes something that we don't want to tackle. So we bury our head, or we want to tackle it another day. So with that in mind, I put together 5 sort of tips to get us started, get the conversation going.
Okay, so the first one is know what your assets are coming in.
Exactly. Coming into the meeting with your lawyer, have spent some time beforehand sitting down with your spouse and putting together your list of your assets. So you want to list out for your lawyer what you have, who owns it, is it joint between the two of you or just one person, how much is it worth, and is there a beneficiary designated on it? Because that sets the playing field, so we know what we have to work with. The second tip is, again, spend some time thinking with your spouse and your children if possible. What do we want to achieve here? What's our best case scenario? At the end of the day, if one of us passes away, what could this picture look like that would keep the most people the happiest? So create your wish list. That's tip number 2, is think about the end game, so that you can bring that into your conversation with your lawyer. And you're not expected to have all the answers. That's your lawyer's job, is to be able to tell you, well, if you want to get to the point where X, Y, and Z is happening, this spouse has that, they're living here, the children have received this instead, then that's my job as a lawyer, to be able to give you those scenarios and guide you through, overlay it with a legal structure that will work or is better than what you have now.
That's excellent advice. And the third tip, be prepared. BC law allows your spouses and your children to challenge the will that you have in place. That's a big deal.
Yes, and this is one of the areas that makes estate planning for blended families really challenging, because it does allow any child or your spouse to bring a challenge and ask the court to change your will. So you've gone through the trouble of setting up this plan, and then knowing it's subject to litigation down the line after you pass away. And that comes as a huge shock to people, and it doesn't go over very well when I explain this to people in our meetings, because it's going against our natural inclination of being able to do what we want with our own assets when we pass away. So it's unique to BC. The wills variation laws are different here than in all other provinces in Canada, so they have to be really carefully considered. And it means that there's this extra layer of complexity laying over everything.
Does it mean you could maybe go to Alberta and sign off?
Yes, I've had clients ask me that.
Really?
Yes. And Alberta doesn't have probate fees either to any extent, so different considerations. So people have done that. So it's something to think about if you're really wanting to be adamant. If people want to escape the BC jurisdiction, they can become domiciled in Alberta. They'd have to move everything there, but You know, in
You've
some
seen it.
cases, we've seen it happen.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The fourth tip, involve your spouse in your planning discussions.
Yeah, and that's kind of the flavor of today's wherever possible. Do that because, of course, your spouse will be one of the people who can challenge this will after the fact. And in most cases, we can create a mutually beneficial plan for the two spouses together. You and your spouse don't have to have separate lawyers. So you don't have to have separate lawyers from different firms. You can come together at a meeting together and work for a plan. So it works better if your spouse is able to uphold, understand where you're coming from, and follow your wishes after you pass away.
And then the fifth tip, choose a lawyer that has expertise in creating and implementing estate plans for blended families.
Yes, because of what we've just mentioned, this isn't the run-of-the-mill routine situation. So it needs somebody with expertise and experience who can guide you through the myriad of legal issues that are going to arise.
Okay, great tips here. I think the other big tip is, like you said, don't bury your head in the sand and pretend like it will all get sorted out. Better to figure it out and make sure everybody's on side as much as they can be.
That's right.
To avoid problems in the future. That's very important. If you have any questions, you can certainly call the lawyers at Fulton & Company. Leah, thank you very much for being here. This is Leah's area of expertise, so if this is something that you would like to discuss further, if you are in a situation where you need to tighten up the will and the estate, definitely worth checking them out. FultonCode.com, as well as the phone number on the screen. We're back in 2 minutes. Stay with us.